All right, well, let's get going. If at any time you do have any issues, try to type that into the same chat question box, and I will periodically check it just to make sure audio and visual is always going fine. So today I'm going to be your presenter. My name's Angelina Jacobs. I'm one of the CRM consultants at CRM Dynamics located in Mississauga, Ontario. Just a note, this webinar is being recorded and will be available online afterwards. Usually we send out a follow-up with the link to this video. We also have tons of other videos available if you want to check out any past webinars or other sessions. You can go to our website and look into our Learning Academy, as well as our YouTube channel just by searching the CRM Dynamics on YouTube. I always say feel free to take down my contact information. You can send me an email if you have any questions or follow-up feedback, any of the sort. I do my best to respond in a timely manner. Some things I can't quite get to, but if I can, I will certainly respond to that or forward you off to the correct person. Okay, so today we're going to be building off the previous basic customizations webinar that was a couple months ago. And we're just going to be diving a little deeper into some of the configurations you can do within Dynamics 365, Dynamics CRM. I use those terms interchangeably. We'll go over solution creation, what that is, how to do it. We'll look at quick create and quick view forms. So normally we will go over how to create a basic web form, but this time I'm going to actually show you some different types of forms, being quick create and quick view. I'll then touch on system views as well. So some people may already be aware of creating personal views and saving those for your personal use, but system views allow you to publish that out to everyone else within the CRM system. Okay, so let's jump right in. I do apologize if it's just a bit slow. We do use demo environments for this. Okay, so first and foremost, you'll see that I'm on the settings customizations page. So up here, I'm in my settings area and customizations. The customize the system link here, this opens up the default solution. What that is it contains all the configuration customizations done for the system. So it's not the data that actually makes up your system, like accounts, contacts, it's the system build. So anything from your fields, your views, your charts, and so forth. So that's the default solution, and you can customize it here. We're actually going to create our own solution so that we only have to include the specific customizations we're going to do today. So I'm clicking on solutions. There should be a ton of existing solutions in here. This is everything from portal, unified service desk solutions, click dimensions. Those would be managed solutions within here that either Microsoft or other third-party organizations offer, but you also have the option to create your own. Now, this also will depend on your security access, so system customizers, system admins. If you have other roles, you may not be able to access this section and create a solution, but you can always get a trial instance from Microsoft if you do want to play around or discuss with your IT administrator. So we're actually going to create a new solution, very easily done by clicking on the New button in the top left here. I'll enlarge the screen a little bit. Okay, so first I have to give my solution a name. So if you're doing things like, sales customizations that you want to have covered, you can give this a display name of sales. Or if it's service, you can give it service. So you just try and give it a high level but somewhat specific name so that you can refer to it and know at a glance what would be contained in the solution. So for this one, I'm actually just going to say CRMD demo. I can either click next with my mouse or click tab on my keyboard. And you'll notice the name here gets filled in automatically based on my display name. So it's very similar to fields when you give it a label and then it gets assigned a schema name based on your label. So I'm going to let it keep that, but you can change it. The publisher. You will always have a default publisher within the system. So if I click this lookup, there'll be a couple in here. You'll see there's some default publishers. You can choose the default one or you can create your own. And I'll tell you what happens when you do this. So I'm going to go look up more records. And instead of selecting the ones available, I'm going to create a new one. And third-party organizations always do this because one, it'll show their organization as the publisher for any solutions they provide. It also will put a prefix on all the customizations that they do. So for this one, I'm going to give us display name of CRMD. Again, I'm just hitting tab on my keyboard. It's filling in this name. But then this prefix piece here. By default, any new customizations you do will get assigned the new prefix. But if I'm doing it under this publisher, I want it to say CRMD instead. So I'm just going to change the prefix to CRMD, and I'm going to leave everything else as is, but you can include information in here. I'm going to save and close. You'll see it's available to me to select, so I'm going to add that. And you'll see in my solution, I now have a publisher of CRMD. Version, I'm going to start off with 1, but as you make changes to your solution, you would definitely want to do some version tracking because it'll just help to see, you know, what versions or how many versions have been done, what the changes were, and so forth. So I'm just going to start with version 1. You can put a description in here. So like I said, if it was sales related, you could say sales customizations for sales process or service customizations for service process. For here, I'm just going to say CRM demo and leave it at that. I have to save this first. So it actually creates that solution for me. And then I'm going to start building my solution. What that means is I'm going to add the entities, fields, views, and so forth that I want included in this specific solution. So in contrast to the default solution I referenced, back here, when I go to the settings customization, this customize the system is the default solution, so it loads all. But if I open up to my specific solution, I can tailor it to just include what I want. This is great for solution management. So if you're doing work in a sandbox dev environment, you could create your own solution that just contains what you want, and then you can export that, which we will do at the end, and then import into your production system. So that way you're not always moving the whole default solution back and forth. You only have to take the customizations you want to move over from one environment to the next. So you'll see here I've got a blank solution. So I need to add new or existing. So if I'm going to add existing, it gives me all the options here. So they should be relatively familiar to anyone who does customization within CRM. I do want to add an existing entity. So for this one, I'm going to add the contact entity. So I'm just going to scroll down through my entity list here. Select contact, go OK. It's going to show me a different screen so that I can pull what I want out of the contact entity specifically. This will differ based on the version of CRM you have. So if you have older versions like 2015, 2013, you most likely will not see this screen where you can get even further into specifying what you want to bring in of this entity. It'll just bring in everything. But for later versions like 365, you can actually pick specific forms you want to bring in, specific fields, specific views. Okay, so you can really tailor it to just what you want. So for this one, I am going to bring in one of the contact forms. And I believe it's just the one contact form. And I'm just going to go finish. You can always go back and add other forms, other views, other fields. But for now, I'm just going to get started by adding the contact entity with that one form available. So if I expand the entity list here on the left side, it'll just show my contact. Now that I've selected the entity, this here will change because it gives me certain options available for entities. I also want to create a new one. So this is another piece of the customizations within CRM that you can do. You don't just have to tailor or customize existing entities. You can create your own. And just as a quick refresher, the entities refer to the sub-menus available or the tables available within your CRM. So for instance, contacts, accounts, cases, leads, opportunities, those are all entities. So I'm going to create a brand new one. I'm going to click New, and it's going to meet me with this entity creation page. Expand that as well. First and foremost, I need to give it a display name. So how does it display in my menu or my navigation menu? For this one, let's just say we'll make a very basic application. So let's say you receive or you need to input application information related to contacts. So I'm going to create my own custom applications entity. Sorry, I should say application. I do have to give it a plural name, applications. Again, you'll notice it pre-populated the schema name for me. And I want to point out, see how it prefixes it with CRMD? That again relates to the publisher I chose when I first created the solution. And then that way, anytime someone pulls up this entity, they'll be able to see that it obviously was a custom one for one, and then which publisher did it based on this prefix. Okay. So going through some of the other options, I'm going to keep them at their default values, ownership being user or team. I can put a description in, and as well as the areas that this will be available. So I want it to be available in the sales navigation menu. You can select all of them if you want. And then you can select other pieces here. So quickly going through some of these, notes is often included, and that just allows you to append notes to this or these records within the entity. I'm going to leave it as is. Activities, those are appending those activities like tasks, emails, appointments, and so forth. And I may want to enable this as well as notes so I can keep that. One thing I will point out is you'll see this little symbol next to it. That just means that once it's enabled, I can't disable it later. So once you've set these as available, they will stay that way. One of the key things I do want to enable on this new entity is Quick Create, because that's one of the forms that we're going to look at later when we go into further customization. Duplicate detection is enabled by default. That just enables it for the entity. And then once you get onto the field level, you can then enable auditing per field. So first you have to set I just skipped two things there. Duplicate detection by default, but you have to set the duplication rules. And then auditing you can turn on for the entity. And then once it's on for the entity, you can set it for specific fields. Okay. I can also enable things for Outlook and mobile. It's totally up to you where you want these available. So have a look as you're creating your entities. I'm just going to leave it as the default values for now. So I'm going to click Save. Sometimes this does take a little bit of time depending on how much stuff it has to create and how fast the internet and system is. This one's taking a little extra long. Again, demo environments don't get the same resources as your production environments would. So we'll just let that go for a little bit. What we will create within this entity are a couple custom fields. So what I'm going to look to do is create a lookup to a contact. I'm not going to go over much on the field types. Those are covered in other webinars, so you can always check that out on our YouTube channel, or even just do a search for Microsoft CRM field types, and it can go through the different field types. but I do want to link this applications entity to contacts, so I will create that. I'll also create an application status. So things like, the application status is review in progress, approved, or declined. And then I'll just add a multi-line text field. So I'll go through those relatively quickly, assuming that you've already seen field creation or that you can go back and check other online resources for that. Perfect. There we go. Thanks for your patience, everyone. Okay, so I'm going to exit out of this now that I've created that application entity, just to show you that it's now within my solution. So I have my custom entity here as well as a contact entity. Anything that I have created within my individual solution is also part of that default solution in the end. So you don't have to worry about adding it to the default system. Anything you create is added to that default solution, which again is accessed when you just click customize the system. Okay, so very similar to other customizations, I'm going to go right into this application entity. Again, you can change some of the entity level options here, but I want to do a couple things. I'm going to create a form and some fields. I can do both right within the form itself. So by default, it gets assigned a main form. I'm just going to go in there quickly, show you what it looks like. It'll be pretty simple. Expand this. Okay, so pretty basic form available. It's got the name, which again is just the record name, which is a text field. Owner, so this would be the owner of the actual record, which by default is usually the person who creates it. And then I've got that lovely social pane with the notes here. So pretty basic. I won't do too much in terms of form configuration in this case. That was covered in the past webinar. But I am going to do some quick field creations, as I mentioned. So within this form, looking at the bottom right, I've got a new field here. And I mentioned a couple new fields that I'm going to create. Okay, so for the first one, I did mention I am wanting to link this to a contact. So I'm going to say label this as contact. Again, I'm just pressing tab on my keyboard, but you can select with your mouse. Field requirement, optional. I actually want to make this a business required, so it has to be filled in order to save the record. Notice it did append that schema name automatically with the prefix CRMD. I'm not going to enable any field security. Auditing is enabled by default, so we'll leave it as is. So the data type for this field is going to be a lookup, which means I'm going to look up to an existing entity, my target record type being contact. I'm just pressing C on my keyboard to get a quicker quick jump to that. Selecting contact. You can edit this relationship name if you want, because it does get kind of lengthy. So I can always just leave it as is and click save and close. Again, if I'm going through some of these things pretty quickly, don't worry, you can always send me an email and I can direct you to the existing training sessions on this. So that's one field. I'm going to create another one, just quickly going through this. So the other one I mentioned was the application status. And this one's going to be a option set. So it's like that drop-down list. So I'm going to select option set. And again, there are two types of option sets you can do. There's a global one, which means it's an option set that can be shared between entities, which makes it a lot easier to only configure once. But for this one, I'm just going to create it right within application entity only. So I had review in progress. And again, I'm just going through this very quickly. Approved, and then declined. Okay. One thing I will set is by default, so this default value is going to be review in progress, because once it's created, that's the assumption, and then someone would be manually changing to approved or declined. So again, option set, setting that default value. You don't have to though, it can be left blank. Save and close. And then one more field. It was just a very generic kind of text box. You can use the notes if you need to add multiple notes or attach files, but for this one, I'm just gonna say general comments. I could make it a single line of text, but I want a little more room, so I'm gonna go multiple lines of text and just leave it with the default values, but know that you can change the maximum length, so to include more characters. Save and close. One thing I will point out with field creation from a form, you'll notice I just created a general comments field. It has not shown up on here because this hasn't had a chance to refresh. So when you create a field using this method, so going new field from the form, sometimes it doesn't automatically show up here because you haven't refreshed this page itself. There's a couple ways. You could just press F5 and refresh this, or you could pretend to create a new field. And you'll notice very quickly it updated this here. And now my general comments is here. And I'm just going to exit out of here. So that's just kind of a neat little tip trick we've noticed because different browsers act differently. But for the most part, if you're creating fields within a form, you just have to do that quick refresh to get the latest field you created. So very quickly, I'm just going to add these fields to this form. Drag and drop. You could also double click. And I'm not doing anything very aesthetically pleasing in this case. That's always stuff you can work on as you publish and view and revise your page, just so it's more pleasing to the eye. But for this, I'm just keeping it very simple. I'm going to save and close. Now, the form that I just created was a main form, which means it's a form that will load if I open this record within a web browser. I mentioned, though, that we'll create some quick create forms. What a quick create form is when you're in the system, so I'm going to go back into my CRM here. When you click this plus button, it's the forms that will drop down from the top of the page, so you can just put in some very quick data and save. So I'll load the contact. Might take some time just to drop down again. But you'll notice it says quick create contact. So the whole point of this is, if you have salespeople, service people that just need to quickly create some records, and there's just key fields you need them to fill in at first, quick create's very helpful for that. And then they can go back into the actual record later on and fill out additional information. So that it would actually then open up to that form that we were just in for the web client. So see here, just a bit of a different format. Very simple, just gives me the information I need, and then I can save it or I can cancel. But this form will differ from the actual main form of the contact, which we'll see later. So I'm just going to cancel this for now. I'm going to go back into my solution. So again, this is where I've added the specific entities that I want to configure. And I'm going to create a brand new form. So I'm within application entity forms, and I'm going to go new. Here's where you have the selection of what type of form to create. So I'm going to first do a quick create form for application. And this is so if someone's adding an application record to a contact, they only have to fill in a couple fields, and it's nice because it drops down from the existing browser window that they're in instead of opening up a new one. So for this one, contact, of course, because that's required. I can put a general comments in here. I can put the application status in here, but no, by default, it is set to that review in progress. I'll put some other fields in here, but these usually are automatically populated, like the owner being whoever creates it. And I'm going to save and close. Okay. Now, if I want to see what this looks like, I have to make sure I publish my customizations, and then I'll see it in the user interface side. So for now, I'm going to go publish all customizations. It's now going to publish out that new entity I created, application, with all the new fields I created, and that new form for the quick create. And then I'll show you what that looks like. Not all entities will have a quick create enabled. So when we first set up that entity, that was one of the check marks I had to allow, where it said allow quick create, but sometimes that's unchecked because they want the users to actually go to the full main form and fill out all the information. Again, this might take a little while because it's publishing out all new customizations, so bear with me. I'll take a quick peek at the questions table because I see some have come in while it loads. Someone was just asking that if it's automatically added to the contact entity. So I assume you're meaning because I added that lookup field to contact. What it does is it automatically creates the relationship between contact and my new application entity. If I want to add visibility, though, of applications on contacts, I will go in after this, and we'll just look at adding a quick subgrid onto the contact form. So because I created that contact lookup, I've created the relationship between contact and application, which means I will have the option to add a subgrid onto the contact form to show the applications that are linked to it. It'll be a lot easier to show than just me talking about it, I'm sure. Okay, perfect. There we go. So once I've published my customizations here, I'm going to go back into my web browser, and I do need a refresh. So you can either refresh within your browser or click the lovely F5. So it's going to reload, which will then make the new customizations available to me. Okay, so I've refreshed my page. I'm going to go into this quick create area here that I showed previously. And yes, you'll see in this environment, there's a lot of quick creates enabled. Oops. And here's my custom entity application. So if I click this, it's going to load that quick create form that I just created. So see how it has contact, application status by default is set to review in progress. I've got the general comments here, and you'll notice by default it puts the admin owner, which is who I'm signed in as here. I could save and close and be done with. So that's one way to go about it. I will now tie this in to why we would create a quick create form, because we won't necessarily be using it the method I went. We'll actually be doing it from a contact. So I'm going to cancel. I'm going to go into my contacts entity. So sales, service, all that. Go into contacts. Some of this stuff should look familiar to those who are in CRM. I'm going to do a quick search for Sylvia. I've got 2 in here. I'm going to open up Sylvia Alberts. and I'm met with the contact form here. So when I was talking about subgrids earlier, I was referring to these types of grids here. So see how this is a subgrid of activities related to this contact? That's what I want to add for applications. So to do that, I'm going to go back into my solution, which I still have open. I'm going to switch my entities. So instead of working in application, I'm going to go into my contact one, which is why I added it to this solution as well. I'm going to go to forms. And this is the form I initially added, so called contact, and you'll see in the back here, that's the form that I'm dealing with as well. I'm going to open up this form, and all I'm going to do is add that subgrid. And again, I can add that subgrid because I've created a relationship between application and contact by adding that lookup field to contact on the application entity. So I'm going to expand this for you and just do it very quickly. Underneath activities, I'm going to insert a subgrid. If this is new to you, feel free to reach out. We do have existing training webinars on this. So I'm going to go through it pretty quickly here. And now I've added that. So I can save and close from here. I can also save and publish from here as well. So I'm just going to do that to make it real quick. Again, just showing you all the different ways you can go about publishing your customization. There's no one way to create fields. There's no one way to publish because it's available in different areas. Okay, I've saved. I'm going to publish. Again, this might take a little bit of time. There, nice and quick. I'm going to exit out of this editing form. I'm going to go back to my actual web client here. And again, F5 or refresh from your browser window. All right, notice the change. I now have an applications subgrid on the form. Now, if I'm within this contact record, as I am now, and I want to add an application record, I don't have to navigate to the application entity or go to the quick rate from here, as I did previously. On the subgrid, I actually have that creation button right here. So I'm going to click that, and notice my quick create form pops down. So this allows me to stay within the initial entity I was in, so the contact in the background, but quickly add a record related to it. So because I was on Sylvia Alberts and I went to create an application, notice it already brought in the contact that it's related to. So it's creating that link. Again, it set the application status, review in progress. I could just say this is a test, and I can save. You'll notice here there's now a record. One thing I will point out is it now has a blank name. Reason being, I didn't put the name text field within that application. And that's because we will cover that in our next webinar where we give workflow automation to label records based on information within. So don't mind the lack of information in this view because I just added it very quickly, but it's just to show you I can continually quick create, use that quick create form for applications. It already brings in the information and I can keep saving and creating. If I knew there was an application to be reviewed for this person, Sylvia, I can just go into Sylvia, see that there's an application, and then open it from here. What this does is loads that main form we saw at the beginning. so that I can see any notes. I can add my own notes, or just in general, change it from review to approved, and then click save. Again, a couple ways to save. Bottom right here, or Control S. In this case, I do realize it's going to ask for a name because I forgot to make that optional, but this field is required in here. So I'm just going to say test application in this case. And again, Control S. I've now saved it. So I'm in the application record. Again, see how it says application? It has my name of test application. I can go back to the contact though because it was already linked. So see how it says contact Sylvia? If I click this, it's going to bring me back into that contact record. And voila, there's that same application. So one of the other forms I talked about was a quick view form. So I'm going to go back into this application. And what a quick view form is it's a very small form that you can add to related entities. Meaning I'm in the application entity, but I want a very quick view of a linked entity, contact in this case. So instead of always having to go back and forth between the application information, clicking on contact if I want details from the contact, I would create a quick view form. So let's go do that in the solution, and then I'll show you what it looks like on the user interface side. So again, I'm opening up my solution. My quick view form is going to be about the contact. So although I will be adding it to an application form, the information itself is coming from contact. So that's where I need to create that quick view form. So again, just to say, because I have in this back end here a contact lookup, I want information from this contact to display within the application form. I need to create the quick view form on this record, so contact. Very easily done. Again, new form. And in this case, I'm selecting quick view form. You want to limit the amount of fields on here because again, it's just supposed to be a quick glance. You don't want it to be too big of a form. So for this example, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add maybe the email and phone number fields. And we'll show you how that displays on the UI side afterwards. Okay, so as mentioned, I'm just going to add the phone number and the email. So very similar to all other forms, I've got my fields available to me here on the right. And I believe we've got a mobile and a home number. So I'm double clicking that. So I've added home phone, mobile phone, and email just in case. And that's it. That's all I want to show on any related entity that has a contact lookup. So I'm going to go save and close. Once I've created that quick view form, I then have to take this and add it to the application form. So again, I want to show contact details within the application here. So I'm going to go to the application entity and that form. So I'm going to go forms, the main form. I'm going to expand this so you can see. And underneath this contact, so again, this contact is a lookup field. I'm going to go insert and see there's this option for quick view form. So I'm going to go insert there. And the data source here, this will vary depending on what relationships you have created for this entity. So in this case, contact's one of them, created by, modified, and owner. So it's very limited because I only created the contact lookup and all these other ones are just default system ones because, you know, it links to the user who created it, modified it, and owner. So every lookup field that you create, which again creates a relationship between the two, would give you or would be added to this option here for the data source. So I'm going to go lookup field is contact. Again, that's the field on the form in the back here. Related entity is obviously the contact. And then it says select quick view form. So there's already a bunch that were included by default for contacts as well as accounts. A lot of the out of the box entities will have these, but you'll see here's my new form that I had just created. And I'm going to go OK. It just notified me I didn't put a name in, so that's my fault. And I'm just going to call this contact details. You can display the label on the form. I don't normally, unless you have to be very specific about it, just because it takes up space on your form. So it makes a lot of white space and again pushes things down. So you'll see here on my application form, I now have this white box, which is that quick view form I created. Because it relates to the contact, I'm actually going to move this up because I want it to display right under the actual contact that's linked to here. I'm going to go save and close. And I'm going to publish so that you will then see what a quick view form looks like. While this publishes out, I'll take a quick look at the questions that have come in, just because this might take a little time as well. Someone had a great question. How can we modify existing subgrids, so like opportunities on the account form, to default to a quick create instead of that search and new function? So in order for that quick create form to automatically pop down, you have to set the lookup field to business required. So on an opportunity, you usually have an account lookup field, or it's called potential customer, I believe, out of the box. What you have to do is you have to make that field mandatory. So it gets that red asterisk beside it, so it's business required. That way, if you have an opportunity subgrid on an account and you click the plus button, it knows, instead of looking up to existing, it knows it will fill in that account. And if you have quick create forms enabled, it will drop down the quick create form. Otherwise, it will open up the main form as you usually have it. So there's kind of two things. One, you have to make the lookup field, so that link between opportunities and accounts or contacts, business required. And on the entity level, you have to enable quick create as well. And for anyone who thinks the screen is hanged, it's just taking its time to publish. So I haven't moved anything. It should have cleared by now. Okay, so it's published. I'm going to go back into the UI side of things and I'm going to refresh. Hitting F5. Thank you all for your patience today. It's a little slower than usual, but we'll get through it. Okay, so I've refreshed my application form, and you'll notice under that contact lookup, this is the quick view form that I just created. So what this does, it just pulls in the information from this record. I can't edit from here. So you see if I click this, I can't put in the home phone number. It's for display purposes only, or if I have a phone integration or email, I could click this and it would open up my default email. But it's just so that you can see at a quick glance information related to any records that you've linked to this one. So in this case, I'm on the application, I link a contact to it. I can very quickly just see some of the details I want about this contact instead of having to always go back to Sylvia look at the contact form for her information. Okay, go back to my application and so forth. So it can be helpful so you're not always jumping screens or that you don't have multiple tabs open just to have information at a glance. So that's your quick view form. Okay. So lastly, I did want to touch upon system views. So I'm going to go back into my solution. And it's just another option available to customize within any entity. So in the contact entity, which is out of the box, there will already be a lot of views available to me. But for any new ones I've created, it usually only gives a couple default ones. So if I go into my views, see how it has some default ones. It's usually active, inactive, and then any of the associated or advanced find views. So these are just default views that get assigned once you create a new entity. I can edit an existing one, which would in this case be beneficial because I think on the active applications view, there's like 2 fields or 2 columns that show. So I might go in here, open it, and then this is quite similar to when you create a personal view using Advanced Find. I won't go into that. It was covered in past webinars, so again, feel free to reach out or just look at our existing resources online that have that. So system views is good for creating views that are beneficial to many departments that use your CRM. So it then becomes visible to anyone who logs in and has access to the entity. Now, there are times where they only have access to certain, they can only access certain records based on their security access. That will always be the guide here. So even if this view itself shows all active applications, that's only true if my security role allows me to see all active applications. There are oftentimes sales roles that will only show active records that belong to that salesperson. So even if they go to, all active, their security will still filter out anything that doesn't meet their security role access, okay? So in this case, active applications, I'm going to do a quick check on the filter criteria here on the right. It should be pretty basic. Status equals active. Boom. There's not much included on this view though, so I want to add a little bit more. I can do so by adding columns. So again, my tasks here on the right, add columns. And then I can add the fields available within this entity. So I do want to see the application status. I also want to see the contact related to it and maybe who owns this application or who created it. It's totally up to you. I go okay, and it's now put them out here. I can then move these around so I can have, maybe I want contact over here, and I just use the arrows available on the right. Application status is fine there. Owner, I'm going to go and move it over here. Some of these things you'll notice are a bit small in terms of width. So I'm going to make this a bit bigger. I select the column header. I go to change properties. And I just increase the width here in pixels. So I'm going to click 200. Sometimes it gives me an error just depending on the browser I use. But you'll notice it actually did the change. Application status, I might want to make this a bit bigger, even just so the label shows. So again, I select it, change properties on the right, make this a bit bigger, I'll make it 150 pixels. It's giving me this error, but you'll notice it does do the change. I'm going to save and close. And again, any changes I've done, any configuration, new or just revisions to existing stuff, I do still have to publish so that it becomes available to the users. So I've done that. I'm going to go publish all. Okay, so we're getting very close to 12 o'clock. So what I will end off with is just exporting a solution. So now that I've done my customizations to the specific entities and areas that I wanted to, so in this case being application and contact, if I wanted to move this and only these customizations from a sandbox environment to a production one, all I would have to do is export this solution and then import it into the other environment. One warning is any field, view that you may not have added to the solution, if it's referenced at all, it does at least have to exist in the one that you're importing to. So if I was on a form and I added a new field, but I didn't add that new field to my field list here in the solution, it would probably fail because the other environment doesn't have that field yet. So just be aware of certain things like that, you just have to make sure that any new additions, relationships, references like that, that are created within here or that you reference but maybe haven't added into the solution, they need to exist in the environment that you're importing to so that there's no errors. Now, if you do get an error, it usually says why, so it's very easy to fix. Okay, I've published the solution. I'm now going to exit out of it completely. And I'm going to go to my customizations solutions area. So I'm seeing my whole navigation menu, settings, right into solutions. You should now see the new solution that we just created this morning. Now, there are actually quite a few people who have asked about best practices to deploy solutions to production. There's no one way or method per se. A lot of it depends on your change management. So, if there's minor things, you can actually import solutions while people are working. If it's just minor changes, usually we try and stay away from that though. If you can import and publish changes after hours, just because sometimes it can bring the system to a stall. It's not often, and that's usually more for on-premise systems. In the cloud, it's actually pretty easy to do if it's not a very big solution with a lot of customizations or changes. But in terms of other best practices, there's nothing too complicated in it. So you'll see here, I have my CRMD demo. I'm just going to select it and click export. What this does, it's going to give me that zip file. I save it to my computer. So I'm going to export. It will ask that I've published all customizations. So do make sure you publish all if you know you haven't or if you're unsure, because if they're not published, it won't come over. I just did it, so I know I'm okay here, but you can do it from here as well. I'm going to go next. Sometimes this will take a bit of time and it'll look like your computer's not doing anything. But what it's trying to do afterwards is create that solution file for you. So in terms of package types, usually you're going to go unmanaged unless you're selling this as a third-party solution. So my examples at the beginning being Unified Service Desk, ClickDimensions, Adobe Sign. Those are managed solutions because we, as customers, you would pay for them from that company. They send you a solution, which means you can't do any changes to it. And if you were to remove it, it would actually remove all the customizations. So that's managed. Unmanaged means that you can add it into your system. But if you were to delete it, it doesn't actually remove any of the customizations. Okay? So you'll see here it says you will be able to modify this solution and can export it as managed in the future. So usually by default, people are doing unmanaged solutions. So here's where I mentioned it'll look like my computer's not doing anything. So you just have to wait. Your browser is generating that file, and eventually, and sometimes it can take up to, I've seen 5 minutes, depending how big the file is, as well as your connection speed. It'll eventually populate the little notification down at the bottom here that says, file has been downloaded or save as, so forth. What you would do, save it to wherever you would put solution files. In terms of best practice, we usually say don't put those on individual computers. Usually you have a shared folder, SharePoint or so, between your IT department or your admin so that anyone can access them. You would save there. And then here you go. See my little pop-up. I can go save as, save it somewhere that I know is useful for my whole team. And then if you were going to your other environment, it's very easy. You would just import here and follow the steps within that wizard. I won't do that in this case because I'm actually not importing anything new, but very simple. So for anyone asking about deploying to production, this is where you would go. You'd have that solution that you took from Sandbox. You would go import in your production environment and follow the wizard there. It would go through import steps. If it was successful, at the end of that, you would allow publish customizations, and then you would be done. You could meet errors though, and usually they're pretty explanatory in terms of what went wrong, or there's a download log file. We always recommend downloading that log file if there's errors because it'll give more detail. And it's usually stuff like there's a missing field or there's a relationship that's referenced that doesn't exist in the other system. So it's helpful to see those log files because then you can do the quick changes back in your original solution. If you start adding more customizations, and then it's another solution deployment you would do, that's when you would start changing the versions so that you can keep that version tracking. So although I would use this same solution, if I'm adding more and making more changes in terms of solution management, you'll want to start changing your versions. And again, this depends on your business. If you do minor changes, sometimes you just keep it as a 1.1, but sometimes, major changes, you'll actually go to a whole version 2. I leave that up to your organization practices. So we definitely used up the whole hour. Thanks very much for your patience while things loaded, because I know that took a lot of time. I tried to answer some of the questions that came in, but I realized there are more coming in. I can take a few more moments just to see if you have anything else you want to add in there, or I can respond to you directly if you want to send me an email. So I'll just take 1 or 2 more minutes, but for anyone who will be dropping off, thanks very much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And do look forward to other webinars that you can register to. So I do know up and coming, we will talk about system processes. So I did mention things like the workflow automation, but also business process flows and business rules. So it's continuing on the whole customization topic that we've covered in the past couple months.